sat down to record this video and ended up with like 2 more full pages of script. All right, Happy New Year. This is The Fit. Welcome. Glad you're here. I don't have the tree up in the back anymore, but that does give some space to my 2 bigatitos. The squish one and the other one, the regular. So we've got them all situated up. Glad you're here. If you are finding me in the big year of 2026, welcome. This is the year that, I don't know what this year is. This is the year that I hit it big. I don't know. I really want to continue making content this year, really put my best foot forward. And, you know, I think I did a pretty good job last year of not falling into the idea that if you're making content, need to be extremely consistent, or you basically fail at generating, you know, the content or the community or the likes and subscribes that you want to generate to make money. For me, that's never been the goal. So I need to, you know, as I get attention on here, I need to continue to make sure that I am putting out quality content, and I'm not just putting out content just to put out content. I think what I'm doing is really important, even if it's not something that everyone likes, or I'm not a very popular creator. I think that the people who are here agree with me that it is really important to be making this type of content. So that is my goal for the new year. A little bit of a longer introduction, but let's get into it. The world wants us to be dumber, and that also applies to gaming, including Pokemon gaming. There is an idea that the population's relative perception of the value of tasks that have been dubbed intellectual are not actually valuable for a number of reasons. People don't want to learn and grow, not necessarily because they want to stay uneducated, but because they are skeptical or mistrusting of the systems that we deem to be intellectual. I have become interested in this topic recently because of the pervasiveness I've noticed in simply not thinking or utilizing other tools or systems that allow someone to not have to think. In my own life, conversations with others are very surface level and lack depth or respect. My adult students seem to require more direction without being able to infer these directions for themselves. And I'm hearing accounts from educators of young children that there is simply no drive to learn. I wanted to explore it further, especially in the context of gaming, and I've come to theorize that one of the biggest problems the community has with Pokemon Unite can be traced back to the concept of anti-intellectualism.
Anti-intellectualism is going to be the downfall of the United States.
So many of the problems that we're facing today all stem from a lack of good education. I think most of us are aware is intentional by our government to keep us dumb.
I'm not making any claims about your specific level of being informed. I'm saying the general rhetoric on the right against education, against higher education specifically.
Why do you think it is? Is it because you think we hate smart people, or is it that there's something happening here that we really think is troubling?
I think it's much easier to control people who are less educated.
See, now you're a conspiracy theorist. So, no, it's...
Anti-intellectualism is a hallmark of fascism.
Not having an educated population means that as a whole we will be more likely to fall for bigotry. We will fall for dog whistling. We won't be able to distinguish genuine arguments and logic from hatred.
As a disclaimer, I'll state outright that a lot of the information I will provide in this video is from the lens of the United States, because a lot of the context we have comes from the culture here in this country. I can't really speak to how pervasive this is in other countries, so maybe if you are from other countries, you can kind of help me out in the comments if you resonate with some of this stuff from your own cultural perspective. Anyway, let's go. Anti-intellectualism is a term described by Richard Hofstadter. I think it's Hofstadter. That's how I'm going to say it. in his book titled Anti-Intellectualism in American Life as something that became part of common language in the 1950s, but this topic has been discussed for hundreds of years. Initially, anti-intellectualism was described as a sort of individualism, a way to denounce the wealth and status of the experts in pursuit of equality. It's an equalizer. It's a way for the common person to stand up and say that their opinions, their struggles, their status matters as much as the privileged elites. This fueled much of the democratic movements in the United States in the early 1900s, where politicians like Woodrow Wilson used this to demonstrate how important it is that our representatives actually represent the common person, because if we have a government of experts, how could they speak for everyone? Richard Hofstadter traced this to McCarthyism. Do you guys know about McCarthyism? Maybe you've heard of McCarthyism, but maybe you don't actually know what it is. So I'm going to tell you. It's so interesting. So Senator Joseph McCarthy claimed that he had a list of secret communists working in the U.S. government trying to turn the United States into a communist country, like a classic Scorpio would. The U.S. then quickly devolved into a period known as the Red Scare, where there was a lot of fear that we would be consumed by communism. Creating this fear was really advantageous for McCarthy, because any accusations from people saying he didn't actually have any evidence, which was true, he didn't have any evidence, they were met with the public's assumption that they must be one of those secret communists. That's why you hear some tactics still used in American politics being called McCarthyism. It generally refers to people using claims against others to leverage fear to gain leverage over the opposition. McCarthy capitalized off of a time where there was a lot of tension about communism after the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia staged a coup and the Soviet Union started to become active in creating nuclear weapons, and there was also the beginning of the Korean War. So him being like, this fear is well-founded because I have a secret list of communists trying to make those things happen here in our country, it gained a lot of traction. Now, McCarthy himself was eventually exiled from politics, but the damage done by the false accusations and capitalization on fear in the American people means that we still see a lot of McCarthy's tactics in U.S. politics to this day. I'm sure you can think of a few particular examples. One of which I will talk about soon, I will touch on a little bit in this video, is the recent bombing in Venezuela. A lot of that was based on the fear that that country is selling drugs to the United States and is a huge cause for crime that makes people afraid and justifies those actions. When Hofstadter discusses how anti-intellectualism was bred by McCarthyism, he's referring to the idea that creating distrust from the people to elites means that many people were starting to question whether the minds of those in positions of power should actually be taken at their word. It created a movement where intellectuals were viewed as pretentious and not understanding of the common person, which may have directly led to the election of Dwight D. Eisenhower for president in 1952, the first Republican president in 20 years. His election was attributed to people realizing that they would rather someone who was very clearly not an intellectual, not necessarily because he was a great candidate. According to Hofstadter, the anti-intellectualists were slapped in the face after Dwight D. Eisenhower was elected because the Soviet Union were the first to make it to space by launching the Sputnik in 1957. Suddenly, everyone was like, wait, hold on, we need the intellectuals if we're going to be able to make these types of advancements, and thus the public opinion began to change. However, some attitudes of this anti-intellectualist movement prevailed. For example, the idea of teachers being useless, the nerdy kids in class being a negative stereotype, universities not being useful or not having the right values, things that we still hear a lot about to this day. It created the idea that the ideal American is a self-made man, the individual who built himself up from life experience instead of education. The 21st century's anti-intellectualist movement definitely still draws on McCarthyist concepts, but in a more modern way. With more information becoming available at a rapid rate, the intellectuals are discovering things and making advances in technology, medicine, globalism, communication, so many things. And we can technically learn about all of them, but instead, many people have a distrust and distaste for the idea that these discoveries are, in fact, making the changes they really want to make. Some of the biggest results of the modern anti-intellectualist movement are your climate deniers, the anti-vaxxers, the fake news, and things like that. Some scholars believe that this movement of distrust for the results of intellectual discovery could be one of the reasons why Americans are generally lacking in basic knowledge and skills when compared to other countries. In my personal opinion, I believe that people just don't want to feel like they are lacking in things they don't understand. People want to feel like they're just as smart and capable as anyone else, and they don't like being told what to do. I get it. I don't want some guy walking up to me and telling me that I have to listen to everything he says because he's smarter than me.
You're smarter than me because you got degrees? Yes. I spent years doing statistics and research and dissecting scholarly sources in a specific subject matter that you did not.
And legitimately, that's how some people perceive intellectuals to be. Not people who are presenting information, but people who are pretentious and trying to take advantage of and manipulate others. There is, of course, a lot to be said about the different ways you can think about something like this, because we can easily see how strict and regimented schooling is in other countries and infer that their individualism and free-thinking ability is being stripped from those children. Anti-intellectualism is about discovering your own knowledge, thinking for yourself, and the freedom to be who you are without the privileges of knowing. It's about questioning everything and being the expert of your own interpretation, protecting your own peace, and understanding that being smart and educated is only focused on one small piece of the human intellect. And when I say it like that, it's definitely something I agree with. But a person who is truly intellectual and demonstrates areas of human intellect beyond just book-based education will be able to understand when information presented by experts should be taken seriously and understood as factual. When you don't have that ability, it becomes almost conspiracy-minded to choose to assume that the experts are wrong or secretly trying to harm you. That is the McCarthyism at play.
We're against higher education because it largely has created an ungrateful, unprepared generation that goes into the American body politic and does not share the core American values of freedom of speech, gratitude for our founding, consent of the governed. In fact, it's hyper-radical. And it's against our traditions, our norms, and our customs, and it's created massive fissures.
The COVID pandemic is a perfect example. So seeing healthy individuals become sick after receiving the COVID-19 mRNA vaccine is an experience that may make people who are uneducated in that type of biomedical engineering question how beneficial it really is if it's making a healthy person who would not likely end up really sick from getting COVID itself become as sick as the vaccine made some people. This is a completely normal way to interpret that experience. But when information is brought to the general public that this is safe, it's working very well, it's saving lives, and it's very important to go ahead and get the vaccine, instead of being like, okay, yeah, that's cool, these people know what they're talking about, if I get these symptoms, that means that it's working well, my immune system is being activated, that's a good thing. The information is disregarded as fake or even a ploy to cause further harm. So like for me, I have a master's degree in biomedical engineering and I know how to read those types of scientific journal papers. So I know how to interpret the scientific data. I've played with the publicly available database of COVID numbers, and I do in fact know how that stuff works. But because of anti-intellectualism, the expertise that I have in that area, which is meant to help people, is often disregarded or even demonized. And it's not just in areas of education that anti-intellectualism is pervasive. It's seeped into all aspects of our lives. People using AI to think on their behalf, being chronically online, creating echo chambers, and being averse to outside thought. I sound old as hell, but like, we used to read books. What happened to books? And of course, it exists in our hobbies too, our sports, our creative outlets, our gaming. I could literally talk about every single thing on this topic and how interesting it is in science and medicine and the overabundance of information causing information overload and hence refusal to accept information. But the topic here is gaming, because that's what I do. In a lot of ways, doing research to create these videos about gaming has exposed me to so much knowledge and really stimulated my intellect beyond what I would come across if I were just focusing on what my job tells me to do, which leads to really interesting thought patterns and conversations that I end up having. So hopefully this type of content interests you too and leads you to also seek out information and have really interesting and stimulating conversations. Now, much of modern anti-intellectualism is geared towards higher education, encouraging the pipeline of universities aren't teaching our students properly, to universities are poisoning the minds of young individuals, to students graduating from higher education are destroying the modern workforce with these university perpetuated ideas, to societies overrun with these intellectuals destroying our society with common anecdotes present in institutions like modern medicine, DEI initiatives, and generally most science-backed phenomena. Gaming industries are aware that their demographics include a large chunk of college-aged students, with about 30% of gamers being between the ages of 18 to 35. Currently, 18 to 35 is mostly Generation Z and younger millennials who are at the forefront of much of the anti-intellectualist rhetoric. This is not new. Younger generations tend to be more progressive than the last, and they swing the pendulum slowly toward progressive ideals like universal health care, free education, and heavier taxes on the wealthy populations in the United States. Millennials and Gen Z are leaning mostly Democratic in recent United States elections, but not necessarily because they align with the Democratic Party, which is still overwhelmingly authoritarian and fairly right-leaning, but because they believe that the Democratic Party is more likely to address the issues they feel are most important, such as abortion, gun control, and climate change. All of these issues are commonly opposed by the anti-intellectualist movement, despite consistent scientific evidence coming out of prominent universities that support these initiatives. For anti-intellectualists to actively go against the science supporting the right to abortion, higher gun control, and addressing climate change and other issues like pro-medicine and things like that, they come to terms with the idea that the higher education institutions are pushing a fake agenda, creating science that just isn't correct. It's surprisingly easy to fall down this pipeline of distrust that leads to a complete distrust of the intellectual class, because there will always be information that backs this up. Science is just not always right. There are confounding variables, there are discoveries made that can't be repeated. The world of publishing papers is really toxic and requires tenure-track faculty to publish work constantly, even if it's not high quality. There are a lack of peer reviewers to ensure that the work being published meets the standards of modern science. Science is a liar sometimes.
You're not going to get us to not believe in evolution.
And why is that?
Because the smartest scientists in the entire world all agree that it's real.
I'm glad you brought that up. Because, Mr. Reynolds, science is a liar sometimes.
Oh boy. So gaming, right? Gaming attracts people in these voter demographics that are generally progressive, despite gaming communities being viewed through a classically not very progressive lens. It's common for gamers to be labeled as misogynistic or egocentric. It's very male-dominated. Racist themes are present in many gaming communities. You can check out my video on identity for more on all of that stuff. I read a very interesting paper where the authors analyzed popular video games between the years of 2004 and 2015 to examine their portrayals of higher education and the connections to anti-intellectualist themes. They based their themes on 3 subcategories of anti-intellectualism: anti-rationalism, anti-elitism, and unreflective instrumentalism. I have made a graphic. Anti-rationalism is just what it sounds like. The idea that favoring personal morality based on religion is more important than rational thought. Anti-elitism is the understanding that if you're an intellectual, then you don't understand what it's like in other classes. And unreflective instrumentalism is the idea that since academia and education don't result in material output, it's not worth it. I'm not going to go further into how easy it can be to fall into these thought patterns, since I basically already did that, but I will be providing examples in gaming based on the paper that presented this data. One game discussed is Fallout 4, released in 2015, where there exists the Institute, a harrowing place where intellectuals lock themselves away from the rest of the world with no way in or out. The general perception of the Institute within the game is highly negative. People have formed a mistrust and in some ways fear, pointing toward anti-elitist principles of a conflict between intellectuals and the rest of the world. When you eventually get into the Institute in Fallout 4, the player discovers that the members of the Institute do look down on the outsiders and believe they are the only ones who can advance society forward, feeding further into the anti-elitist thought. I've never played Fallout 4, so let me know if this resonates with you if you have. Another example is Bloodborne, also released in 2015, focuses on trying to stop the outbreak of a disease that turns people into beasts. You find out that the disease was a cause of experiments done by the students of a Bergenworth college, where they focused on the positive properties of this otherworldly blood instead of the side effect that turns you into a gross creature. It is heavily rooted in anti-rationalism, subject to the idea that these scientists did not possess enough morality to understand that knowledge isn't always worth the sacrifices of human lives to obtain it. Besides institutions themselves being represented with anti-intellectualist themes in video games, intellectuals themselves are also often represented as less than ideal. These characters tend to be pretentious, mostly white, within the STEM field, socially inept, and often not super important to the plot. Not saying that video games are fueling the anti-intellectualist movement in any way, but the themes of higher education being generally distrustful with members that are nerdy or mean or whatever could perpetuate the idea that achievement of education is what breeds negative characteristics like pretentiousness, elitism, and lack of morality, which leads us to the analysis of games and the critical thinking required to understand these underlying themes. In my opinion, this paper I just described to you doesn't exactly get the whole point that the anti-intellectualists themselves aren't reading this deep into it. They take away what they want to. And if the institutions are the problem in the game, they will use that to fuel their understanding of institutions in real life. If they do not believe that to be true, that higher education breeds a lack of morality and elitist ideals, then playing the game is simply a thought experiment and gives individuals an opportunity to think and reflect on the impact of gaming, the decisions it leads us to make, and the cognitive reshaping that it does, just like the authors of this paper have done. Are games forcing hidden messages in hopes to damage our vulnerable population's perceptions of intellectualist thought? Or are games an art form that often commentates on reality through their storytelling? We see this in discussions about how seriously we should be taking video games all the time, especially when a game has a very obvious message with a political leaning. In my opinion, all games have the power to convey a message. Even the simplest puzzle games follow some storyline. if you take the time to reflect on it and how it affects you, you can truly take anything from it and apply it to how you feel about your life. But we often see people start to get upset when games include a representation of a specific social position, like including gay characters. This is also why I personally really love things like astrology and tarot reading, like things that are generally spiritual, that the public has a very much like a distaste for, like, oh, this isn't real. But if you do look into it further and you do take in all of that information and really self-reflect on it, the point of it is really that you take what you want to take and you have the opportunity to apply it to how you feel about your own personal life. Whether you think there is scientific merit or not, there might be merit to reflecting, understanding yourself more, applying it to real life situations or your life, and move toward the person that you hope to be. The fact is, the age of internet comes with many rules, as described in a blog detailing how video game interpretation, criticism, and thought really is deep. And the internet does include gaming. The first rule is to be entertaining. Lie. Be funny. Stimulate the masses. Traditional education is boring. Choosing to be educated by entertainment is stimulating and fun. The second rule is to make people emotional. Rage bait. Make people mad. Scare them. Make them lean into anti-rationalist thought. Discussing video games as an art form often gains traction when it does these things. An idea brought up in this essay was the desire for people to turn their brain off through gaming. The idea that we don't have to think about the politics, we don't have to make hard decisions, we can just be stimulated. The author of this essay argues that it's exactly what the most powerful people want, to distract us from how anti-intellectualism weaves its way into every aspect of our lives. We're fed slop and told we deserve to turn our brains off. And sure, things are overwhelming. Turning your brain off isn't always this awful, evil thing. Engaging in entertainment slop isn't bad. It can be great for our emotional well-being and it can make us smile. But the idea that gaming shouldn't be that deep and it shouldn't contain deep theming and opportunity for reflection. The more you don't think, the more you feel like politics has no place in gaming or gaming isn't that deep. The more you feed into anti-intellectualism that those in power truly thrive off of. The dumber we are, the less we think, the more intellectuals are villainized for thinking deeply about how gaming affects us, the more we keep those harming us in power. They need us dumb and scared, and we are absolutely giving it to them with the way we approach our games. Now, I can't continue without discussing that there is this other side to anti-intellectualism, in my opinion, that tends to fall under the radar. And these are the people who act like they have a lot of knowledge and demand accountability for others not possessing that knowledge. So I kind of covered the anti-rationalism and anti-elitism aspects of anti-intellectualism in gaming, but unreflective instrumentalism, again, is this idea that academia or education doesn't result in material output, making it not necessarily worth it. The internet and social media is a material output. This type of information that we get from the internet, from our games, are material outputs that we can hold, we can see, we can touch. And this idea that becoming truly educated doesn't lead us anywhere, but you can tweet anything, you can say anything, you can claim to know anything. I believe that this idea of the people who act like they have a lot of knowledge falls under this unreflective instrumentalism. This comes from a subsection of what many people call cancel culture or accountability culture, where people demand responses from individuals for the things they say and do that has been perceived as hateful or incorrect in some way. In some cases, however, this involves people not acting or not having knowledge. The internet is a place where black and white beliefs and opinions is the correct way to exist. And if you're not 100% with us, then you are 100% against us. It's extremely difficult to keep up the facade that you have zero nuance and ask zero questions, but this is, in fact, the dominant narrative.
Refusing to accept nuance in situations and thinking of everything in a very binary way of good and bad is a form of anti-intellectualism.
Everything you say on the internet is said as though it's fact. It is material. It's not what education can get you. You can be anyone on the internet and make claims to be an expert on something as long as you are 100% confident and saying the correct version of the black and white opinion, then you're safe.
If you want the general population to be smarter and to put an end to anti-intellectualism, you cannot keep making fun of people for being wrong. When people say that there's no such thing as a stupid question, what they mean is even if your line of thinking is wrong, you're still thinking. Now, it's one thing if the person is being mean or hateful or insisting that they're right and not taking any feedback, but y'all will ridicule people for simply asking questions or admitting that they don't know something.
The people that are supposed to be on your side must be on your side and ask no questions. It creates environments without further discussion, without asking questions, the echo chamber, with expectations that you will always say the exact right thing and claim to have the correct information, even if you don't. I will give you a personal example that I've spoken about before. So years ago, I was publicly tagged by someone because I was following a person on Twitter who was a Zionist and because I hadn't said anything publicly about the Palestinian genocide. Now, I straight up did not know that I was following a Zionist because I'm not constantly stalking everyone's profiles looking for clues on whether or not they support genocide. Maybe some people believe that I should, but I don't have that kind of time. If I see something on my feed that indicates that someone I'm following is a Zionist, or I'm getting Zionist rhetoric that shows up on my feed, I unfollow or I block them and I move on. After this encounter, I was really terrified that what I wasn't saying was going to be perceived incorrectly by the community I'm trying so hard to be included in, which turned into me checking to see what the dominant opinion is and making sure I publicly agree with it so that nobody can yell at me for it. After a while, I realized that this performative activism is actually insane. I really don't know much of what I'm talking about, and I'm only acting like this so that everybody thinks I'm good enough. It's selfish. It doesn't lead us anywhere. The performative activism is so prominent in internet culture, and I don't really think anybody actually knows what they're talking about. I watched a video recently of a creator in the commentary community who was attacked in a video for talking about Starbucks without mentioning that Starbucks was being boycotted due to its ties to the Palestinian genocide. It turned into literally such a, you like pancakes, so you hate waffles discussion that he stopped making content for over a year. And his claim at the end of it all was that people on the internet are seriously stupid. And I agree. I think this mentality falls under an area of anti-intellectualism, fueled by embarrassment of not knowing enough information. So instead we simplify every situation into these two black and white sides instead of seeking out and understanding the information that we're even talking about. It's the idea of unreflective instrumentalism. You're not reflecting on anything. You're just looking for what that opinion is, making sure you say it, and acting like you've done your good deed for the day. But think about it for a second. Think for a second. Be honest with yourself. Do you know exactly how Starbucks ties to the Palestinian genocide? Do you know exactly why boycotting it has been suggested? Do you know why we shouldn't be supporting Starbucks at the moment? Do you know what Starbucks has said about the situation? Really, think about it. Be honest. Did you see it somewhere online and feel obligated to perform that action to be on the right side of history? Because I'll be honest with you, I didn't know. I had no idea why I was seeing people get attacked for having Starbucks cups in their content or posting about it or being seen actively still going to Starbucks. I didn't know. I just realized that it was likely that I was going to be attacked for posting anything having to do with Starbucks, so I didn't. But as it turns out, there's no evidence to suggest that Starbucks financially supports Israel. And they also don't operate in that country, not since 2003. The reason why it's been boycotted is much more so due to a lawsuit between Starbucks and their labor union, where the labor union publicly offered support for Palestine, and Starbucks didn't like their logo being used in political messaging. The other reason is due to their former CEO being unapologetically pro-Israel and was pro-Israel while he was actively CEO as well. So now you know, because I didn't. I had to look it up for the longest time. I didn't know why I was boycotting Starbucks. I didn't know what the story was. So you have more information now on why this is happening and can actually sit with this and determine how you want to approach boycotting this specific brand. Where are your lines? What lines are you drawing in terms of this political situation? How much are you saying? How much do you know about what you're saying? A lot of these things happen on the internet and definitely in gaming communities as well. You're told about what the opinion is for the side that you identify with, and to be considered part of that in-group, you don't really think to ask questions. People are afraid to seem like they don't have all the information because we're taught that you must know, creating a culture of people who act like they know without actually having the knowledge and being too afraid to ask at this point. I'll be honest, it's hard to keep up with a lot of the things happening in the world. It's hard. There's a lot of things that I don't know. I'm not very well spoken when it comes to debating or remembering explicit facts. I have to look a lot of things up. I am not very impressive when it comes to that stuff. Like, the United States just attacked Venezuela, and I've heard that there's been like some narrative going around for a while about the Venezuelan government not being great or, you know, whatever it is. But I'll be honest, I had to ask a lot of questions and really look into what has been going on to actually understand why that decision was not well founded and formulate my personal belief that this was done for unjustifiable reasons. The first I heard of it, though, was through very blanket statements made on the internet saying, like, this is bad or this is good. And in my opinion, I don't really think people know why it's good or bad, though they want you to think they know. These are obviously a couple of really extreme examples, but I need you to be able to contextualize what I'm trying to demonstrate here. In gaming, this form of anti-intellectualism manifests often as parasocial behavior, believing that a content creator or gamer is always sharing the correct information and supporting what they say means you get to be in their club. It's easy. You just get to follow one dude and agree with everything he says, and that's how you approach the game you play. Now, don't get it twisted. Anti-intellectualism, at its core, defines a mistrust in the experts, which does not mean 100% trust in the experts. This form of anti-intellectualism goes so far the opposite way into full unquestionable trust that we're right back to no critical thinking, no knowledge, and no way to process and understand information. I'm not saying question everything, but I'm saying think for yourself. Identify what it is the experts are actually experts in. Are you claiming that they're the experts so that you don't have to think? Like, I'm not an expert in economics or politics. Like, anything I just said before about really intense political situations happening is not at all something that I've studied. So in those types of situations, I encourage you to seek out interpretations by people who are experts in this area. I am an expert in engineering education and biomedical engineering, so when you hear me talk about that, that's probably information you can use to start developing an opinion on those types of related topics. Does that make sense? Basically, there's two types of anti-intellectualism, kind of, but they fall under the anti-rationalism and anti-elitism kind of in this one group, which this type of anti-intellectualism comes from a fear that individuals that are supposed to have your best interests can't be trusted, leading to a lack of critical thinking and mistrust of crucial information. And then the other kind of type falling under unreflective Instrumentalism is operating within this black and white world of not needing anything that isn't material output, where you have to attach yourself to one of the sides that exist, leading to the blind trust of individuals on your preferred side, leading to a lack of critical thinking and mistrust of crucial information. Now, Alex, aren't you a Pokemon creator? Can you shut up and just talk to me about the thing I came here for? Yes, I will do that. But consider within yourself for a moment. Wasn't thinking about all of that other stuff like fun? Wasn't it like learning the history and the thought process and understanding it in terms of real life, real world examples and applying it to gaming? Like, wasn't that insightful? How might you, before I even say anything about it, how might you apply it to the way that you think about your Pokemon experience? I would like to start off the Pokemon section with this video by Cecily, a Pokemon creator who really goes beyond the idea that Pokemon is just a cozy, fun little catching game. She loves Pokemon enough to explore the deepest themes of the games. My favorite video of hers was her deep dive into Legends ZA. Now, were the themes she discussed throughout this video the intention of Game Freak's design, or was it just her interpretation? It's up to you. But this is a perfect example of intellectualist thinking that was met by an anti-intellectualist gaming world. I went back through her tweets to find this and got distracted while stalking her, but eventually I found where she released her video, and it created a group of people who were angry about the lack of oversimplification in her content. Her initial tweet reads, "Wish me luck. This isn't a video about Windows. It's about gentrification, the housing crisis, anti-homeless benches, toxic Yuri, Kinetics, using type immunities as a narrative device, the best story we've ever got, and a Pokemon game made with care for fans." This initial tweet included a knock at the discourse surrounding the visual effects and repetitive design included in Lumio City, paying special attention to the design of the windows. Basically, this tweet was saying that there's so much more to this game than some half-baked windows, and we should really be focusing on these in-depth themes. But in the world of the internet, where liking pancakes means you hate waffles, many people in her replies were still hung up on this Windows thing. This is an example from one person where they said, "Someone, fan of Pokemon since the start of the series and has always loved it and thought Legends Arceus was great. Legends ZA comes out as a mess. Same guy critiques Defenders. Oh, so you aren't a real Pokemon fan?" And she responded and said, "I'm critiquing the game in this video too." And they went on an absolute rant where they said, "This clearly tells me how well you've studied spelling class, so I'll save you the Google search and make it easier for you in reminding you. To critique means a serious examination and judgment of something. It does not mean to give satisfaction to. I hope this helps." So the word you want to look for is called pander. Of course, there are definitions to this word that aren't so appropriate, but I assure you that this is the same word that means to give satisfaction to. I hope this also helps. Use a dictionary for reference next time. That's crazy. First of all, insane. She didn't respond. I don't know if she responded. I forget to look, but like, dude, that's crazy. This person was so angry that she enjoyed the game and wrote an incredibly in-depth video, both critiquing and praising the themes of the game, that they resorted to being straight up mean about it. And still, they refused to engage with her interpretive thinking. There is no way they watched that video because she did critique the game in it. She did say a lot about what wasn't good and what she didn't like. There was also another person that said, "Everything in this game is empty and funless. The battle system is really boring, even if it's faster than before. The strategy really don't exist. The character are boring, and the talk about nothing for the entire game. The story, yeah, isn't a story in this game, haha." So I switched to the anime main character voice. But anyway, she said, "Oh no, you refuted my hour 20-minute video with a tweet. What shall I do?" No. Dude, she's so funny. She's better than me, because I would crash out, personally. But again, someone was angry that she enjoyed this game, didn't watch the video, and resorted to a very basic negative opinion of it. They use empty and funless to describe the game, but don't really interpret what it means to them. the characters are boring and talk about nothing for the entire game is clearly indicative that this person didn't care to explore the deeper meanings behind the characters' words or their personal stories. There were so many comments under this tweet that were so angry about someone's interpretation of a game they liked that didn't agree with hating it like they do. And they all hinged on the simple fact that they hated it. There was no actual exploration or analysis of the character or story theming and coming away with the conclusion that it wasn't good. There was just anger and empty claims about how much fun they didn't have. This is exactly what anti-intellectualism does. It makes us angry about the prospect of exploring another's opinion. It makes us boil down in-depth exploratory thought into simplistic, mundane opinions, and it refutes anything that challenges us to think deeper. And it exists based on a fundamental mistrust of expert opinion and the idea that someone who is intellectual is just trying to manipulate us. New topic. I've had a fundamental issue with the way competitive Pokemon gaming is structured ever since I became involved with competitive Pokemon Unite. Pokemon titles are extremely competitive esports with opportunities to provide careers to the participants. But at the same time, it doesn't take itself very seriously. The aura fundamentally surrounding Pokemon is that it's Pokemon. Anyone can play it and succeed. And I firmly believe that the Pokemon Company doesn't want us to think that the highest level is out of reach for the common player. But it just is. If you've ever watched competitive Pokemon in any of the titles, you will see that there is a huge gap between the highest level of competition and the casual player. But the way Pokemon structures their tournaments and provides little support for competitive players just speaks to them not really wanting to acknowledge that. In a recent video by Wolfglick, he talks about how being a famous figure in competitive Pokemon has not resulted in any consideration from the Pokemon Company and how they accommodate him at events. Now, he didn't directly say this, but this was my interpretation of a lot of the problems that he was talking about. The bigger competitive Pokemon gets doesn't seem to affect how Pokemon treats extremely famous people at all. In my opinion, it's because they didn't want competitive Pokemon to create a divide between the highest levels of play and the casual enjoyer. They wanted people to see Wolf play and think, I can do that too. And part of that facade is the idea that he's just walking around at the event like everybody else. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad mission statement. The idea that anyone can enjoy Pokemon is what makes Pokemon fun and special. But the insistence of the Pokemon Company to make sure fans engage with the game while thinking they can play the game at the highest level is rooted in anti-intellectualist ideas. There's a level of cognitive dissonance associated with it, first of all, and using the wolf situation as an example to me reads very anti-elitist. The Pokemon Company doesn't want there to be elites who are literally just the best that no one ever was, because it creates a hierarchy that players have to climb instead of putting everyone on an equal playing field. They want there to be a distrust, so to speak, of the expert wolf's opinion and strategy, while at the same time feeding into people's delusion that they don't have to think too much about their engagement with Pokemon as long as they follow exactly what the game tells them to do. This idea, in my opinion, has led to events, especially in-person events, being unsafe for those individuals at the highest level. People who are idolized by people of all ages to the point where many people literally get into VGC specifically for the purpose of hoping to face and beat Wolf Glick someday. And when we have fans who are fueled by anti-intellectualism, we have what I call an oversimplification of competitive play, as well as what competitive players go through to be as good as they are. Players boil down games to luck rather than exploring the decisions being made. They discuss how all you have to do is press the right button, all you have to do is draw the right card, all you have to do is use the exact meta deck or team and you can be just as good as everyone else. It's not only anti-intellectualist, it's also egotistical, and it puts famous competitive players like Wolf in a very awkward position. He said himself if he loses, he's a fraud. If he wins, that's what's expected of him, so it doesn't matter. But in my opinion, people aren't thinking critically enough about what it actually takes to be a competitive Pokemon player in any title. And a lot of that, I truly believe, is a result of the way the Pokemon Company frames their competitive integrity. Now, obviously, the Pokemon Company is well aware of how important critical thinking and decision-making actually are in being a successful player, which is why for TCG and VGC, you see divisions based on age group. It's not possible for a young child to play at the level of a grown adult with a fully formed frontal lobe. When you look at the other two current competitive titles, Go and Unite, they are age restricted as well, meaning you are not eligible for competition until a certain age is reached. For Pokemon Go, they follow the age of digital consent, which varies in different countries, but it's never below 13 years old. For Pokemon Unite, it is 16 years old or 18 years old in Brazil and India. And even though you can be very young and competing, the youngest competitive players are always revered as very impressive, because we know that the ability to keep up with the advanced decision-making abilities of adults is extremely difficult to achieve. On the other hand, older participants are also impressive because cognitive function in video game decision-making tends to decline as we get older. One study highlights that anyone can improve their cognitive function in gaming with practice, but we peak in functionality between the ages of 18 to 24, and it consistently shrinks with age. The reason I bring this up is because the age demographics of gamers are most consistently between the ages of 18 and 34, the same demographic that we discussed earlier in terms of voting patterns and the people most likely to have higher levels of cognitive function related to gaming decision making. However, even though we know these things, Pokemon, in my opinion, still attempts to cater the perception of competitive gaming as very juvenile, easy, something that doesn't require a lot of thought, while still making decisions that actively appeal to this age demographic, and even still ensuring that players don't feel like they have to think too much. Going back to Legends ZA, people's reactions were very anti-intellectual, as we explored with my earlier example, but even if you do look deeper and take it more seriously and take the time to explore the world and think deeply about it, you're not rewarded for that. You can choose to have no strategy. You can learn nothing about mechanics or EVs or IVs or held items or natures or anything and still do well. In my opinion, the way the games are designed is very well balanced for both sets of players. People who don't want to think about it and people who want to think a lot about it, which makes it so appealing to wide age demographics and diverse audiences. But we've also noticed that these groups are at odds with each other, leading to comments like, it's not that deep, when people who do think harder and explore further and utilize a strategy they enjoy using, or a general anger toward people engaging with Pokemon in a way that they're not, or becoming angry when Pokemon adds more diverse ways to engage, like the clothing choices being customizable regardless of the gender chosen at the start of the game. Assigned gender at launch, assigned gender at game start, at file creation, I don't know. Going deeper on that last point for a second, the anti-intellectualist movement tends to be very unaccepting of gaming adding these types of features or using story to explore commentary on real-world themes. Pokemon is no different, where they include diverse characters and intentionally create them to appeal to the interpretations of anyone who interacts with them. Like, as a gay person myself, I was absolutely playing Legends ZA like, oh yeah, Gwen and Canary, they're girlfriends. They are dating. They love each other, even though it's not explicitly stated. You can also interpret their relationship in other ways. It's vague on purpose to allow the user to interact with and think about these characters in a way that allows them to reflect on themselves. However, what we also saw is anytime anyone would say that they ship them or that they enjoyed their story and interpret it with romantic undertones, the dude bros would flip. And not necessarily because they interacted with the characters and just simply didn't interpret their relationship that way, but rather because they don't want to think about it at all. They don't want to engage with the possibility of the Pokemon world, including something they can't personally relate to. it's uncomfortable, and it forces them outside of the anti-intellectualist bubble. I'll end this section with a few overarching points that I think are important to take from the idea of Pokemon and anti-intellectualism. Pokemon does an amazing job of appealing to all ages and a diverse range of fans, allowing players to build their own experiences and interact with games however they want to. With this mentality, though, I believe that Pokemon doesn't take the competitive scene as seriously as they should, and they tend to dumb it down to accommodate the anti-intellectualist mentality of it being a juvenile hobby. I believe this leads to a lack of protection and respect for high-level players and talent. Finally, Pokemon stories and strategies are interpretive and engaging, but the anti-intellectualist fans tend to continue to dumb it down to the bare minimum, which is fine, but they also tend to create a hostile environment when surrounded by fans who do enjoy the critical interpretation, leading to, in my opinion, a player base rewarded for refusal to think deeply and feeding into the social media, quick, entertaining, high emotion-inducing content that keeps us interested. It's been an hour of me sitting here and recording. I don't know how long it's going to be edited at this point in the video, but I am just now getting to the actual stuff on Pokemon Unite, and I still have, how many pages? I have like 4 pages left. All right, but now it's time to get into Pokemon Unite specifically. If you weren't with me with my reaching for a lot of the points that I made in the previous section, I'm about to bring you right back. In my opinion, Pokemon Unite is the Pokemon title that is most subject to the anti-intellectualist movement. In most Pokemon titles, it's part of the charm that it's extremely interpretive and how you can play and engage with it with whatever level of thought you see fit. You can just collect TCG cards and not take it seriously beyond that. You can play VGC with whatever level of thought you want by following whatever the best builds or Pokemon are. You can do the same thing with Pokemon Go, and generally if you want to play at the highest level, you won't make it very far with the strategy, but you can still casually enjoy yourself. This, in my opinion, is because these games are purely individual based. You play by yourself against another person, so you are only ever going to be as good as you are. You can blame luck for some situations, and you can create cognitive dissonance, which certainly many players do, but there's nowhere else to go besides examining your own strategy and really thinking critically if you truly want to improve. Pokemon Unite doesn't have that luxury. It's a team-based game where your success not only depends on you, but also the other people that are placed on your team and against you. So how does Pokemon, an IP hell-bent on making sure anyone can be the best that no one ever was, balance a team-based environment? Well, they simply don't. One of the biggest complaints of Pokemon Unite has been the low-quality player base. Interacting with competitive Unite as compared to your normal game of ranked solo queue is an entirely different world. It feels like no matter what, you're always fighting an uphill battle, being paired with players who have no idea what they're doing and are still consistently in the same games as you are. I'm going to talk about 3 overarching points here: the ranked system, the quality of the Pokemon themselves, and the interaction with the game mechanics to kind of emphasize the points I've been making. Look at all this cat hair on my microphone. What the hell? I promise I'm not disgusting. Jesus. If you didn't notice it before, you're not going to be able to look away now. Firstly, Master Rank is too easy to get to. Before the addition of the Legend Rank, Master Rank was achievable at as low as, I believe, a 42% win rate. I'm not sure what that looks like now with the Legend Rank edition, but since they added this new rank without entirely resetting the ranks of the entire player base, we're still getting put in matches with sub 50% win rate players. I've heard from a lot of people that this has been the worst matchmaking they've ever seen. Having an even higher rank than Master to really set yourself apart from other players was honestly a solid move. However, the player base has gotten too small for the Legend rank to even be able to get you games. And don't get me wrong, this has been a great change, but it's coming a little too late. And now the content creators and the pro players who are always looking for games aren't finding any at all in the highest rank. The way this game was set up was for Master Rank to be the main gameplay mode. Everyone gets to Master Rank, everyone climbs, and everyone feels like they're good at the game. Because of this, players are able to maintain an anti-intellectualist mindset and refuse to actually identify where they should be improving, learn about macro and micro strategies, and actually conclude that they're lacking in specific areas. The game doesn't tell you what you're doing wrong, and a low win rate for the longest time has meant nothing. You don't have to think or learn or strengthen your cognitive mindset. You just have to play, and you will be successful. This type of system rewards suboptimal play and, in extreme cases, straight up griefing, which in turn rewards an anti-intellectualist approach. Why would players be motivated to get better when they're already the best? There's also the concept of bots being very prevalent in lower ranks. The concept of bots? Anyway. Which is why I claim that Master Rank has been the main gameplay mode for basically the entirety of the game's lifespan. Even when it's the start of a season and ranks are reset back to Ultra or Veteran and a good chunk of the player base has to play games at those ranks, they're still forced into bot matches. I made an entire video about bots and why the only thing they're good for is making players feel good about winning a game. But the main point is that beating up on bots doesn't teach players anything. You can lose every single game you're in with real people and win every bot game, and you'll still end up in Masters. And after years of players saying that they would rather play a bad game with real players than a good game with bots, the developers have now made bots even more prevalent and inescapable. Previously, players would be able to dodge a bot game by exiting out of the app during Pokemon selection, but now it actually treats players who dodge as AFK and decreases their number of ELO points. You are forced to play the games where you don't have to think, and they hand you a win. Not to mention casual mode, which is pretty much only bots. Bots have also gotten easier to make sure that a player wins the bot game, again, taking more cognition out of the equation. You don't have to think to win bot games. You don't have to think to win regular games. You don't have to think to rank up. And the only ones being punished are the players who care. Next up, let's talk about the quality of Pokemon releases. Now, personally, I absolutely love the way this game is played. The Pokemon are fun to use, different builds do interesting things, and I really enjoy the playstyle of so many Pokemon. I'm a ribbon hunter, I have a ton of green ribbons, I have 2 gold ribbons. Like, I love playing a bunch of different Pokemon, learning the playstyles, learning the moves, watching content that gives ideas for builds. I love all of that stuff. Generally, the amount of thinking a Pokemon takes to use varies, which is great. There's always going to be easier and harder Pokemon. For example, Mew is one of the most skill-intensive Pokemon in the game, and it can flex between 3 sets of moves, making 9 move combinations, and it can be played as a damage dealer or support, and it's classified as an attacker. On the other hand, you have attackers like Electro Ball, Volt Tackle, Pikachu, based purely on sure hit moves that make it very easy to use. This Pokemon also fulfills a similar role to Mew, but it's much simpler. For me, I enjoy some really low skill floor Pokemon like Sylveon, and some very high skill floor Pokemon like Dodrio. I've also made a video on easy to use and hard to use Pokemon, but here's a graphic based on skill floor and skill ceiling based on my personal opinion. But you know, you can totally disagree with me. There's a lot of Pokemon in the game now, and I don't play all of them. But if you don't know what skill floor and skill ceiling are, basically the skill floor refers to the lowest level that it can be performed successfully, and the skill ceiling refers to the highest level that it can be performed successfully. For example, Pikachu's skill floor is very low, but its skill ceiling is a little bit more middling because its secondary moveset requires optimal aiming and move cooldown timing, so more skill expression means better performance. Now let's talk about the balance of the Pokemon. One of the main complaints over the years is that Pokemon Unite releases a lot of their Pokemon in a very overpowered state. I've made videos on this. Everyone's made videos on this. Is it always true? No, not necessarily, but it's enough of a pattern for it to be noticed by the community. When these Pokemon are overpowered, it becomes easier and easier to win games with them, obviously, which means you don't have to think as hard about the decisions you're making. Pair that with a low skill floor Pokemon move kit, and you have the anti-intellectualist's dream. Again, why would you learn how to actually play the Pokemon and increase your skill ceiling if the skill floor is good enough to win you games? Why would you look up guides or listen to pro players or rewatch your own matches to see where you can improve if you can simply pick Icicle Spear Glaceon and one-shot everything as soon as you hit level 12? As you can see, based on my opinion, there are so many more Pokemon on that left side of the chart, meaning you don't really have to do that much for them to be decently impactful in the game, but for many of them, you can increase your skill ceiling to do way more. There you'll see a lot of really commonly played Pokemon like Decidueye, Espeon, Greninja, things where if you press one button you'll do something, but when you play against a really good Greninja, there's a huge difference. The right side of the chart is a lot more scarce, including Pokemon that are just harder to play, so we don't tend to see them as often unless they're really broken or something. So generally you'll see players playing these Pokemon when they want to learn how to actually play that character and try to get really good at it to express those higher levels of skill. My point of this section being, you don't have to think much at all to win games with more than half the current roster, and much of this chunk of Pokemon are what you see as the most popular picks among the player base, pointing to the anti-intellectualist mindset of this refusal to learn, the distrust of information put out by players who know what they're talking about and generally not strengthening their gameplay. Finally, we have the interaction with various game mechanics. Now, the reason I wanted to put this video out now, which now when I wrote this was a little earlier than now as I'm recording it, and even later than, or even earlier than the now that you will be seeing it, but it's because of the recent changes to experience. But there are plenty of game mechanics that fall into this category as well. For the longest time, EXP share was the most broken item in the entire game, and it was imperative that it was run on 2 Pokemon on a team. Videos were put out, discussions were everywhere. There's a spreadsheet out there detailing how this item used to work, and it literally did not matter. It didn't matter. The game itself didn't encourage its use. Players felt like it was putting them at a disadvantage, and generally nobody knew how to use this item, even if they did put it on. Despite the mountains of information at our disposal, players absolutely refused to seek it out, leading to a huge gap in knowledge, even at the highest level of play. When you don't know how the item works, you don't know how EXP gains generally work, you don't have to consider how you're going to be the highest level possible during the end game. You're not farming or staying near a Pokemon with EXP share to farm. Literally nobody had any idea how this item worked or how EXP is measured and distributed in the game. So instead of encouraging players to learn about how this item works and why it's so important that certain Pokemon are running it and why EXP gains work the way they do, recently the game just changed the entire way experience is run. And I mean, I don't necessarily believe that the game should have a ton of overcomplicated mechanics that nobody understands, or items that are so fundamentally broken that they have to be run. But I do believe the game should encourage its players to critically think about how decisions they're making are affecting things like their damage output, their experience gains, their evolution gauge, whatever the case may be. And yet we still have players storming into the enemy goal zone by themselves 3 levels under and pinging thanks after they inevitably get KO'd. Now, the way EXP works is to ensure that players don't have to think about it at all. EXP gains are evenly split, it doesn't matter who gets last hits, and as long as you farm experience, then you will get to the level that you need. There is no more mechanic that forces you to try to understand how experience is gained and how important it is to increase your levels. Honestly, this change, I feel like, was because they realized that those in the player base who know what's going on can't save everyone who doesn't. So they're rolling back on mechanics that take high levels of skill so that it's easier for those players to not have to think. Another example of this, which I didn't even write down, but I just thought of it right now. An hour and 15 minutes in, I just thought of it. Remember the super jump? Like, if you could stand on inside the base on the springboard, there was a way with some micro skill that you could super jump quickly and skip the animation of the springboard, like lining up. And they took that away. Like, sure, it might have been something that wasn't intended, but it was a level of skill expression. And they were like, yeah, the dumb people don't know how to do that, so we gotta take that out because the dumb people gotta be just as good as everyone else. There's also plenty of other things like held item selection, drafting, so many mechanics that suffer from this exact same problem. The game encourages anti-intellectualist thinking because players who don't learn aren't able to understand the decisions they're making that are negatively impacting their game performance. Instead, encourages players to blame others regardless and refuse to improve or engage with the abundance of educational information that's out there. So what do we do? What do we do? Nothing, really. If you're watching this video, it's probably because you're trying to learn things. Even I, with my incredible knowledge, with my godlike sense of ability to interpret information, even I can't save all of these people. So, I don't know. You're here. Keep learning things, keep engaging with information, and prepare to always keep improving. It's very easy to get caught in brain rot content and echo chamber content and do things that don't really stimulate your brain. But remember to check in with yourself once in a while. Do some reflection. See if you learned anything today. Have good conversations. And of course, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Let me know in the comments if you got this far what you learned today. And I will see you all next time. Bye!